Hi, everyone. Happy to welcome you all to our next virtual meetup. I'm Adam Hilbert, representing Emily House Meetup Group, and saying thanks and hello to all of you who joined this time. This time we teamed up again with our friends at Meetup AI and brought you an exciting panel discussion. Very much looking forward to it. First things first, a couple of just small administrative things. You can leave your comments, questions in the chat. We'll have a look at them and read up. You will also see them in the screen, and hopefully our panelists can refer to them. Also, we will post a Wonder link after the panel where we can do a little bit of virtual networking. It has been working quite well. Let's give it a try one more time. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, feel free to do so. Great way not to miss our future meetups. And with all that, I'd like to introduce you someone who probably all of you very much know, Nicholas, or friends from Meetup AI, and just ask to take it away, Nico, and introduce our exciting panel.
Thank you very much, Adam. Hello for everybody from Meetup AI and also from the outside. I'm very, very happy to be here with our friends from LL and Healthcare. To start off with the people in the comments, let us know where you're watching us from. One of the main advantages of doing events online now is that we know that the content that we're producing actually is available for people all over the world. So we're always very happy to hear it. And as Adam said, we're going to be doing a small round of networking afterwards. Stay over if you want to ask some questions or just talk to us. And with that, I would like to bring to stage our panelists for tonight. So let's give it a second so everybody can join in. Thank you, everybody. So we are joined today by Joseph Kambeitz from the University, professor of biological psychiatry in University of Cologne, and he's also a big data researcher. Christina Fo, who is a veterinary data scientist. Andres Garcia, who is an MD and health informatics expert, and Rafael Olaya, who is an MD in data science at the NHS and a startup founder at Medigate. To all the speakers who are joining us today, thank you very much for being here and sharing your experience and insights. And so that we can already get this started, our topic for today is why doctors should become data scientists, which is a bit of a, let's say, controversial question, but a question that we're going to be discussing today nonetheless, and which one I believe it's a very crucial one to be asked as well. So to start off, given that all of you transitioned to this field in one way or another, I'd like to ask, how did you fall in love with data? How did actually you make that transition? And I'm going to go by the order of the speakers that I introduced. So Joseph, you could start.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. I'm happy to answer that question. I think it's a very important question, and I thought about it for a little bit, and what I would like to say is, how did I fall in love with data science? Is probably all good love stories. It was a bit by accident, actually. And I fell in love actually first with science. And I started university as a psychologist and studied psychology. And back then it was still normal to just investigate a couple of subjects, run an experiments, and then you run an ANOVA, and there you have your results. And while I was at university, things started to change a bit. And all of a sudden you were confronted with data sets that were several magnitudes larger, where you had all of a sudden brain scans with voxels or genotyping data with dozens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of variables. And all of a sudden, statistical methods didn't seem so applicable anymore. And the field was changing. And all of a sudden, I realized that that thing what I accidentally started to practice in my research had a name, and it became known as data science, that is called today. And so accidentally I started to practice that, and I fell in love with it. And I think it's really a fantastic love story also, because it seems like that there is a ever-growing community. There are amazing tools available at the moment, and still nowadays I don't have so much time, unfortunately, anymore to code myself, but when I do, I enjoy it a lot. I get into a very calm state. It's almost like meditation when I learn to code, and I never lost that joy of analyzing data, wrangling it, and coming to results using data science in my scientific research.
That's actually a very, very good, and I imagine that a lot of love stories start without realizing that they are love stories, right? So it's a pretty good story. Cristana, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, me too. Actually, I also fell in love with data by accident, I guess. So I basically started programming last year. So I first fell in love with programming, and then and I didn't do this with the intention of becoming a data scientist. Actually, I just want to learn programming because out of curiosity. So and when I did this, I like kind of naturally stumbled upon data science because I started reading more about AI in medicine, and yeah. So then I kind of discovered what actually is possible with data, and this was just so fascinating to me that I decided I want to take this path. Yeah,
it's a very, very good one. Andreas, what about you? I know that your discovery started a bit sooner than that of Cristana, right? I think Andreas is having a bit of technical.
I was finishing my med school career. Do you hear me? No.
Yes, we can hear you.
No. Okay, good.
I think that actually Andreas is having a bit of a technical issue. Andreas, let me just have Raphael then saying first, and then I'll come back to you in a second, okay? All right. So Raphael, then please, what about you?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit of two sides. The first side was a bit more accidental, and the first side was kind of on purpose. I came to data science first of all through thinking it's the most efficient and most effective way to be productive and add value to healthcare. You know, I was seeing lots of different blogs online and information from like TED Talks and medical technology conferences talking about data science. And I thought that's going to be the best way to add to my skill set, to be productive and to be useful in healthcare. And I was doing a few entrepreneurial things with virtual reality. And I thought for me to be the most useful, then it's to learn data science. Other than that, the more accidental side to falling in love with data science, you know, I think that's the key part of the question. Not what made me do it, but what made me fall in love with it is specifically, you know, every day in healthcare, especially when you're more junior, things seem more black and white in the sense that there's right and there's wrong. But the more you read into detail, if you're a detail-orientated person, you see that it's not really black and white. And for me, you know, it was kind of frustrating seeing that the way things are communicated and taught, they seem black and white. But the more you learn about it, the more you know that there's a middle ground. And I think that's where data science lies and allows you to see, hold on, here's the uncertainty, and here's what we can do about it, and here's where the decision science comes into it. And for healthcare, I think that's so important because everyone's different. So for me, that's where I fell in love with it, really, understanding that this is a tool that allows us to kind of see the truth. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Raphael. I think we just got Andres back as well. So Andres, we bring the question back to you. How did you fall in love with data science? Actually, with data in general.
Yes, so I was practicing medicine, right, my last year, and maybe two little stories. One, I was able to have a handheld device early on, and I was able to use it to store all the current books, all the internal medicine, you know, Harrison Internal Medicine, etc., etc. And I realized that my better access to information improved my performance as a physician versus my peers. So this was point number one. Point number two, we have to do a final sort of social year in medicine in Colombia, where I'm from, in Latin America. And I wanted to pitch a project where I would, we have some poor neighborhoods around my city, around Bogota. And I wanted to pitch a project where we would use a centralized geographical information system to sort of see how different kids in different neighborhoods progress and where shall we direct the resources of the city to be more effectively used for these kids. So these kind of, you know, two projects on how do we better improve the outcomes of patients directed me towards what is the future of healthcare, and it has to be with data. And then I started my path towards health informatics and data science and so on and so forth.
I think that in the sense that chimes very well with Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback on my side. But that's shown very well with what Raphael was speaking before about understanding that in the beginning it's everything black and white, and then later on there's a lot of gray zones when it comes to healthcare. And I think a question here, and a question that maybe a lot of doctors ask themselves before getting into data, before doing this jump, is which kind of opportunities are there after you learn this? What can I make? What is interesting? And I think Raphael is already touching a bit on that. So Raphael, if you want to keep on going a bit and say, like, how did you feel when you got access to this? When you started by doing, right? And then you fell in love. And what did you do with that love? Tell us a bit about it.
So before I even started investing time and energy into it, I was looking ahead to think, hold on, how can I use this commercially, entrepreneurially, and from a clinical point of view to actually help patients? I was really trying to think hard to make sure it's of as much value as possible, because of course I was thinking, you know, programming, learning how to program looks quite difficult. And, you know, on the parallel to my medical career, there's gonna be opportunity cost. You know, if I'm not doing data science, I would be doing something else, whether that's progressing in more of a clinical side of things. So I was really looking, you know, to see how I would use it. So, you know, I would split it into a few main categories. I'd say more on more of a commercial side. So maybe more entrepreneurial, thinking about product management, things like A/B tests and deployment. And then I think, which is still healthcare. And then also more on a clinical side, such as genomics, or things like, for example, pretty much statistics and using, you know, coding for that, and helping the clinical teams make good decisions. And then more on a management side, which is, you know, kind of commercial as well, because you can go into management consultancy in healthcare. So for me, I'm really quite interested in all of them, to be honest. But the opportunities, they're quite broad. But I think you need to be focused on what skill set you want to develop, because someone can spend their whole life doing each one of them, and they can, you know, and that's without a clinical career. So you need to be quite focused.
That's a very, very good point. And then I would like to throw it for Joseph, and then to Kristana, a similar question. Joseph, as you work in psychiatry, do you feel that you were very limited before you got to data science? And was data science a way of you furthering, let's say, your work as a doctor, your work as a researcher?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that acquiring some basic expertise in handling data and analyzing it with novel statistical methods was for me a key point in my scientific career. And it gave me the freedom to independently address specific research questions, to analyze data independently, and that was super important at the early stages of my career, and it's still today. And I believe, from a psychiatrist's point of view, that data science has two main points where it can help doctors, and that is understanding disease and as treating patients. And when you think about treating patients, then in psychiatry, what is common practice, and I believe this is also true for other fields of medicine, is that often we do not know what is the right treatment for a specific patient. We know from randomized controlled trials, like what is on the group level, what is an efficacious treatment, efficacious drug, or something like that. But often in psychiatry, what we do is that we treat with the first medication, and if the patient doesn't respond, we switch to the next, and so on. And of course, this is not satisfactory. So data science gives us the possibility to employ things like machine learning to personalize medicine and to potentially find the right treatment for the right patient before we initiate treatment. And then, of course, the other aspect is that in psychiatry, the diagnostic labels, the diseases, let's say schizophrenia, depression, and so on, those are horribly heterogeneous class labels. So you probably, if you saw a couple of patients with depression, they're super different, right? They're not like the same patients. They might have different pathologies. They might have different outcomes in their lives. So data science gives us the possibility to model that heterogeneity and understand more. What does it mean to suffer from depression, to suffer from schizophrenia? And of course, this informs us as doctors how to avoid risk factors and how to treat patients.
Very, very good, Joseph. Kristana, what about you? How did you feel? Because I understand that on your side, data science is also almost a separate passion as well at this point, right? The the passion of learning. So, but tell us how it was for you, and maybe let's already take a step into the practical transition. So, how did you start actually learning more about programming and data science?
Yeah, so yeah, right now, yeah, I guess it's still like a separate thing, but this is also why I chose to participate at a boot camp to learn data science and to learn programming, because for me, as Raphael mentioned as well, like when you decide to take a new career path, you have to invest time and maybe also money. So and there's also a risk involved in like leaving the path you had and not forcing this one, but choosing another one. So for me, the decision to participate in a boot camp was like logical, because it gives me a solid background in a short amount of time. And with this background, I can decide like on which skills to focus and in which direction I want to go. So, and the question you asked, like what opportunities, like what personal opportunities I have, this is a question that definitely comes up to my mind a lot now. So, yeah, I guess I will have to see. I think this also strongly depends on, just on the working opportunities there are. So I guess I'll have to see. I mean, also like what Joseph said, I see all those advantages. I can also see in veterinary medicine, like coming to diagnostical tools and everything. But like personally for me, where my place is going to be, I cannot really tell yet. So yeah. So this bootcamp, I guess, was a really good choice to focus quickly. Yeah.
I think that it's a beautiful point also to make here, that a lot of times in the middle of the transition or before you transition, it is okay to not necessarily to have a feeling that this will bring a lot without necessarily knowing exactly what will bring. And there is value in just feeling that the data science is an extension of what you're already doing, but there's also value in feeling, just like Raphael was saying, that it opens possibilities that are not necessarily inside of the medical, like the pure medical side. I would like to pull Andreas a bit on this conversation, because Andreas is also doing an MBA, if I understand right now, and it kind of work in the intersection of three fields: so healthcare, business, and let's say managerial decision making. So Andreas, tell us a bit more about what the opportunities were for you when you learned about data, and how you're trying to bridge different areas using data right now.
So, I mean, and I see there's a lot of people like joining, and I want to invite everyone to also ask us questions, because this would have a very nice conversation towards the end. And I'll try to bring some of my expertise in the questions that I've seen. And like when I decided to do this transition, it was kind of like more like blind love. I didn't calculate the risk, or is this a career path that is worth pursuing. I just really dived into it. I have a brother who is also a practicing physician. He works for the Cleveland Clinic Medicine in Miami. He's a neurologist and so on and so forth. So we finished med school close, and we had divergent paths. For me, this path has opened up from basic research. I've participated in projects financed by NASA and the U.S. Army in how non-clinical personnel makes decisions either on space or on the battlefield, and how we should support them in making decisions. For instance, military soldier steps on a landmine, or a woman delivering a baby in the middle of nowhere needs support for making these decisions. And I've done like basic research on how to improve clinical decisions for non-clinical personnel and for clinical personnel as well. And from the academia, now I moved to like more clinical research in clinical trials, and how we can use clinical data to predict how to better deliver clinical trials for vaccine development, for example. I had a cohort of 3,000 patients and a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. And currently, it's more than a business-oriented, and it's how do we support hospitals all across EMEA region, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, understand which of the technologies of the data science universe better are suited for them to be implemented today. And this is a very complex decision to be made. It involves hundreds of thousands of dollars, a lot of effort and hours, and so on and so forth. And so maybe through these three examples, I want to point out that there are like many different career paths, whether in academia, whether in clinical applications, in clinical trials, or in sort of like from a business perspective, that and this will only keep on growing. So I want to make a little bit of, an example that people should jump. We need more healthcare background people to be able to drive this field forward, also to improve the field for ourselves. And yeah, maybe that would be my beat.
That's a very, very good point. And actually, Andres pointed out, yes, please send your questions in the chat. I see that there's already quite a few pouring in. Some of them is also questions that I have. So I'm very happy to see that I'm aligned with the community watching us. And before I start taking some of the questions in the panel, I'd like to ask a bit of a controversial question as well, because that's exactly where Andres kind of ended. Do you believe, and I'm asking here to all panelists, do you believe that to actually being able to implement AI in healthcare, do we need actually more doctors to be data scientists, or let's say a more basic knowledge of data science would also be acceptable? Let's talk a bit about here, like how much data science should we know to be able to leverage AI tools properly, let's say inside of practices in hospitals. And I'm going to give that question first to Rafael, but this is definitely open for the panel. So whoever wants to go after him, please just raise a hand and I'll give it to you. So Rafael.
So this question is a question which, I was asking myself a lot in the early days, and a lot of people, when I'm speaking to junior doctors, medical students, or anyone about this, that's a question that they have, because a lot of the time they're thinking there's opportunity cost in learning, as we said before, because it takes time and energy and quite a lot of stress if you're not really a mathematical person. So, so come back to the main question of what's the threshold? What's the threshold of the amount of data science you need to be useful? And I think it depends what you're doing. I think if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and you want to be able to speak to other more deployment, production level machine learning engineers and people that can tweak algorithms, then that threshold, for me, how I would define it is, I think you need to immerse yourself in data science for at least, I think, 6 months. I think after 6 months, you should get to a level where, you can have conversations and you know what you're talking about. But I think in that immersion of data science, you need to be doing it almost every 2 days or every day, because if you build up that compound interest, you sort of really get to grips with it, and you can sort of get a feel for the data science itself. But I think doctors can still have benefit, and clinicians and anyone in health can contribute to health data science by knowing less. For example, there's lots of courses on Coursera or DataCamp where it gives them a bird's eye view of understanding. But I feel there's a blind spot. There's a really evident blind spot from a clinician's point of view, who they've not invested enough time, but they think they don't know what they don't know. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And when they don't know what they don't know, it's difficult for them to understand, hold on, if I put this much more time into it, this is the information and the possibilities that would be exposed. From my point of view, I was definitely in that perspective. I thought, okay, I know enough. I've done this course, even though I don't know how to code. Then I learned more, and more was exposed to me. And I probably still have a blind spot in understanding more, but it's not clear to me. So I feel there definitely is a threshold, but it's difficult to see without going there.
That's a very, very good point. Andreas, what about you?
Yeah, I want to jump in and say, like, I don't know, if I talk to doctors, I think every doctor would remember in the books the Pinard's bell, the previous device for the stethoscope, and then some doctor came up with the stethoscope, right? And so what I'm trying to say is the industry is in a deep transformation like never before. And it needs to be driven by people with experience in the industry, business experience, people who understand who is a payer, who is a patient, and who is a provider, and the rules in different geographies, in different settings. People with clinical experience. My first idea was to design an electronic medical record, and I saw painfully how many electronic medical records were implemented, and I saw clinicians complaining for almost a decade that they were not serving their needs. And by what they were really telling me was a data science question, how to properly display the information required for clinicians to take better decisions. And what data points do clinicians need to take better decisions? This is a data science question. It's not only about machine learning and so on and so forth. It's also about data display and data utilization, right? But it is us knowing our clinical exercise, the ones who should feel the call to transform our industry. And we need a lot of people like this. Now, do you need to know a lot of programming skills to transform the industry? Not. There is business layers. There's as Rafael was mentioning, if you want to go into the minutia of this thing, absolutely. But there's different layers where we can play different roles, and we need these layers to be filled by people from our industry.
Very, very good, Andres. And I loved how you said what he was asking me was a data science question. Indeed, you're not necessarily need to be talking data science to be actually asking a question that could be solved or is supposed to be solved with just better data science. Then I would like to invite in Cristana as somebody who, let's say, went to a path which I've seen a lot of other industries doing the boot camps, going online, learning the skills, appreciating yourself. Do you feel that this is a path that should be opened for more doctors, that they should be kind of moving into that direction? How do you feel about this whole thing, about how much should doctors actually know to be able to take part in the industry?
Yeah, I definitely think more doctors should do it for the same reasons that Andres actually mentioned as well. And so, yeah, for me, like I already mentioned, it's also like a calculation between time and how much time can I spend on learning new things. So I think this really intense boot camp is a good choice also for doctors, because in my personal case at university, I actually didn't get such an intense statistical background. I didn't have any interface with AI or data science really, because I wasn't in research, also not as a practitioner, because I've been working as a practitioner for the last year. So for me, basically, it's all new skills. So, but this shouldn't scare one. It's definitely worth doing, and it's also a lot of fun, because also I think you already have a certain similar mindset when you're a doctor or veterinarian, because you have this analytical mindset, solution-driven thinking, and this is something data science needs as well, and you can build upon that. So. I think it's, at least, even though maybe if you stick to your old career path after that, it's definitely worth doing, because after knowing data science a bit, you also have another, you can look at data differently, and you can also look at studies differently and at results. And so also for your personal advantages, this is definitely good. So.
That's a very, very good point. Thank you, Cristana. And with Joseph, I'm going to be a bit mean, because I'm also going to be bringing already a question from the audience, because somebody there, Anna D, had a very similar thought that I had. And because Joseph is inside of the university environment right now, then the question comes, should more data science actually be taught inside of universities, or like Andres did, should be to stay as a separate course? How do you feel about it? You probably worked with a lot of research assistants as well, and tell us your experience basically working in data science, let's say from inside of academia. And then the question, should we be teaching more doctors about data science already during university?
Yeah. So short answer is yes, absolutely. I think there is a pressing need that this becomes a more substantial part in the medical curriculum. And I think it goes even deeper than that. So I think that statistical methods, at least I can only talk about in Germany. I'm not sure how it's in Colombia or in the UK, but at least in Germany, this is a very small part of the medical curriculum, and many doctors are not really comfortable with even basic like statistical concepts like positive predictive value, sensitivity, specificity, and so on, let alone like data science in a more strict sense. So I think that there is a really pressing need, and as Andres says, there is a transformation going on in healthcare in general, so this will become more and more important. And I also think that when we talk about data science, it is true what Andres says, that not every doctor needs to know how to code. That's definitely true. But I also think that it can help. And I want to avoid to always talk about coding as something that is like scary, or like that you need to be a math genius to code. It's not true at all. And I think it has never been easier to go online, to find a course on Coursera, to books, to attend something, to get a basic understanding of coding. And it helps a lot getting more familiar with the concepts, what it means to analyze data, what it means to make a prediction, what a logistic regression is, and so on. So that can definitely help. So I think I have a very strong opinion on this, but I really feel that there is a pressing need to do this. And it's also true what Raphael says, that many doctors don't know what they don't know. And I think it's now our task to open the doors for young doctors that start their medical studies to offer the possibility to get more familiar with this concept, because of course it's not the doctor's fault, right? I mean, they've never been in contact with data science, so how should they be like data scientist experts all of a sudden? And also for maybe young doctors that finish medical school, or experienced doctors, to open up possibilities to get more familiar with the topic, to find somehow an entry into this exciting field. And then I think we will be able to manage this need in the future to have people that are comfortable with data science, but they're also knowledgeable in medicine, because this overlap is super important for the future of this area.
Very, very good point. Andreas, did you raise your hand there to make a point?
Yeah, maybe just a quick one. I think this question of if it should be taught in med school is like a double-sided coin. The other side of the coin, that if I'm entering today med school, like first semester, maybe a normal question I should have is what would medical practice would look like when I finish, right? If I'm in the last year of med school, the normal question that I would have, and it's a pressing question, is what kind of practice would I do in the next 5 to 6 years during my residency years, and so on and so forth, and how to better prepare myself for these years. I don't think it's anymore the question of if it should be, but it's like, what tools do I need to have to be prepared to properly practice in the future? Because the future is changing, whether I like it or not. And the question is, am I prepared or not?
I see that I was going to say exactly that. I see from Raphael's eyes that he wants to comment, but just like with Joseph, his comment has an extra point on it coming from Greifax, the question. Because I do feel his question is, should doctors not only become data science, but also entrepreneurs? And sometimes I ask myself if Raphael fell in love with entrepreneurship first, or data science, or data first. So Raphael, first about if data science should be taught in universities, how you felt about it, but then already let's crack open this entrepreneur question as well.
Yeah, it's quite a personal question for me, because at medical school, I was in Liverpool University, and I got involved in entrepreneurship. It was in the wellness industry for fitness technology, and I almost strayed away from medicine, to be honest. And after finishing medical school, I did a year doing that, which was we're using a lot of data, but more kind of product orientated, like A/B tests and things like that. So I didn't even know that was data science then. So, and that really helped me when I came back to medicine to make kind of more strategic decisions. However, the NHS is it's a monster, so to speak, in the fact that it's so big, it's very slow. And if you're an innovation type person, and if you're attracted to that naturally, then it can be very, very frustrating. So sometimes it's not right for people who think they're entrepreneurial, because it can be very frustrating and it can slow you down. The medical training in the UK, I think it's the longest in the world, to be honest. So that can slow you down from getting your ideas into fruition. So should doctors be entrepreneurs? I wouldn't. I don't think it's good for the healthcare system, especially in the UK, if all the doctors are thinking like that. However, what I think doctors should all have, I think, is something which is part and parcel of entrepreneurship, and that is, thinking for yourself. And just because things are the way they are in front of you doesn't mean they're right. Entrepreneurially, you always think, hold on, how can we make things better? What's the solution? Solution focused. And even though someone mentioned it before in this panel that doctors should be solution focused, a lot of the time, personally, I feel a bit like a soldier following algorithms, and I'm not thinking for myself. And it's really frustrating. So, if more doctors thought for themselves, I think better clinical decisions would be made, and I think that's what is part and parcel of being an entrepreneur.
That's a very, very good point, Rafael. And I'm going to open a similar version of this question to the panel in general by bringing in the comment from James Kerr, which is asking about the differences of applying data science methods for academic research and for commercial use. What are the pros and cons? So in the commercial setting here, he mentioned startups or even established companies. I think this is a perfect question to start with Andres, as somebody who, as he mentioned himself, has done it in a couple of different settings. But then I would like to hear the points from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I would say, so let's say, medicine is a universe, and then data science is another universe, and they both intersect in a little bit. And there are some elements that are nice to be brought into the academia to run some academic projects, but I need to be aware of the biases included in data, of the ways data is represented, and et cetera, to think beyond my academic exercise. How can this be replicated in the public? I'll give you an example. An AI algorithm that, when I compare AI versus dermatologists, performs equally well. But when dermatologists are with time pressure, the AI performs the similar, the dermatologist performance drops. This is a Nature publication from maybe, 4 or 5 years ago. The question being is, why is this not being used more everywhere? And it is because we also need to understand that when we apply it in the academia, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in the realities of the businesses of every hospital around the world. So let's say, since I travel a little bit within Europe, I used to before COVID, you see that different data is represented in different ways. And so if I use a set of data to train an algorithm, then this training, a big question that I would have if I pass it from the academia to the business is this training scalable when I'm going to go from hospital to hospital to hospital? And what the scalability limitations or what the scalability issues will bring for my business deployment. So I would be like very keen on sometimes, and we like back in the day did a couple of publications on very academically driven projects, but when we think about scaling up, which is when you're thinking about the business area, there's always this, what biases of the data, of the representations and so forth, I need to bring to the other side, and what does it mean when I try to do a business out of it. And to me, it's always, at the end, is what is your ultimate objective? It could be, for example, can this academic approach work? This could be, and if I answer this hypothesis, it's very good. But another hypothesis could be, am I creating a method to improve substantially the outcomes of a very specific group of patients? And if so, is this generalizable? Then different methods will apply, and different mindsets will need to apply. So it's a little bit very different. But if you know a little bit about data science, then you would be able to select the right tools for each scenario.
Very, very good, Andres. Does anybody want to comment on this question from the panel? Otherwise, I would take another question from the audience. And this one is from Dawdud, and specifically for Kristana. And I think it's an interesting question as well, because Kristana is looking for a final project, right, for the bootcamp at this point. And it is, Kristana, do you have any ideas already in terms of like how could be some potential use cases for data science in veterinary medicine? Something that you're passionate about, you find interesting?
Yeah, I am actually quite passionate about image segmentation and image detection, which in veterinary medicine is similar to human medicine. But I just read about an app that was developed, and that is quite promising, I guess. It's like an app for the first consultation, because in veterinary medicine you often have the problem that people on one hand don't go to the vet, even though it might be necessary because it costs. They don't have health insurance for their pets, or they are frustrated after the first consultation because they feel like the vet, that was expensive. I spent a lot of money for nothing, because like maybe it wasn't such a big deal. So there's an app developed that does like a pre-diagnostic next to teleconsultation. And I guess this can be a big advantage if like this maybe frustration of the first consultation is not projected on the vet, because then this will like lead to more trust and a better compliance, and might have a direct impact on animal health, on companion animals' health. So yeah, that is definitely something I'm looking forward to. Yeah, it was just developed, I guess. So it's a very special application, but yeah, that's what I read about. Next to yeah.
I think it's very interesting how it is as much a medical question as it is a business question, right? About how consumers are actually using veterinary services right now, and how the fact that people who are used to have healthcare insurance for everything would feel about other healthcare services which are not covered by insurance, which brings to the point that data science is often not only about coding, as Joseph made a very good point of, but also of asking the right questions and figuring out how you can answer. And with that, I'll bring a question up. Actually, Raphael, make a point, and then I'm going to have a question from the audience for Joseph.
Yeah, just a quick one on the veterinary question we just had. I don't know much about veterinary sciences, so please correct me if I'm mistaken. But one of the big barriers in healthcare for humans is the fact that fallibility. Even though the great algorithms that are being developed have a high accuracy and other metrics, and sometimes better than clinicians, if it goes wrong and it makes the wrong choice, even though it's still better than a clinician, that's a big issue, and it's preventing some of these algorithms from being used, especially in NHS. But in the veterinary world, do you think that because it's animals, and of course they're seen differently to humans, but I love animals, and I'm sure everyone loves animals, but still, because they're not humans, do you think the barriers are less? And just thinking for myself now, I think that's possibly a good thing, and that could lead to more developments. What do you think, Christina?
What do you think, Christina?
Yeah.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's a tough question. It's a very ethical question as well. So for me personally, the barrier shouldn't be less, definitely. So, and I don't think it makes sense, because like for those people that own these animals, they are worth everything. So I guess, yeah, the whole industry is based on how much people, like for the companion animals, I'm talking about companion animals now. So the whole industry is based on how much people love their pets. So I guess if we lower the barrier, this might lead to a worse outcome, and maybe pets get misdiagnosed or whatever. I don't think this would be a good idea in long term. So
Andreas, you want to make a mention there?
Yeah, I was thinking on the maturity of the regulatory frameworks in different geographies, and veterinarian versus human healthcare medicine. And I was thinking, let's say in the NHS everything is like super hyper regulated, but in emerging markets, for example, there are some like not so much regulation. So there are some pockets where some algorithms or some applications could have quite an impact. So what I've seen is sometimes emerging markets could be a little bit of a greener field to try things that in other areas they're not. And I wouldn't see it so much as per veterinary medicine versus human medicine, as per more strong regulation versus less strong regulation.
I was actually thinking exactly the same thing as Andreas was, but in the point of basically in Europe here, not emerging markets, But there's a lot of apps out there already using, let's say, some version of AI in healthcare, and they kind of run away from the position of we are giving diagnostics. And they're not doing this because they are afraid of not being able to do this properly, but because of the wealth of regulations that come on top of this. So even the system that Christiana was saying about some pre-diagnostics for animals that could make people feel more comfortable going to a veterinarian and make it worth it. Like sometimes it would be a question in Europe, it's like, okay, but are you pretending that this is a diagnostic? Because if it is, this can bring like a lot of trouble. And it might be just a case that in veterinary medicine, if the regulatory boundary is a bit lower, it's not even about loving the dogs or loving people more, but more just it provides an opportunity to not having to deal with red tape that really stimulates innovation in some areas. When I actually met Kristen, I mentioned to her on via email that I was, because I don't hear a lot about AI in veterinary, I also get very excited about it because what else can be done, right? You mentioned like the emotional companion, but veterinary, let's say industrial scale as well, with like farms and everything else. I imagine the potential that AI has on that to be able to keep like larger groups of animals happy, healthy, and track like diseases going through. Like probably a very green field, as Andreas said. I'm going to flip the topic a bit, and I'm going to take a question from Mikhail Kharkov for Joseph. And it's like, Joseph, can you say more exactly what results did you achieve while modeling depression and schizophrenia using data science tools? If this is not your area of research right now, Joseph, feel free to change that question to your present area of research.
Yeah, perfect. It's exactly my area of research, so I could certainly talk about that for a long time. I will touch on a few topics that we have investigated. So the first aspect is, and that's already a couple of years ago, is that we were trying to see if data science can help us to come to some automated diagnosis in those disorders, schizophrenia and depression. Because if you're a psychiatrist, diagnostics looks like a patient is explored by a psychiatrist. And that's, of course, time-consuming, but it's also to some degree subjective, right? So we were hoping to find a way that you can use neuroimaging data. So this is brain scans, structural brain scans, or functional brain scans, to automatically detect whether a patient is suffering from either depression or schizophrenia. And we were conducting some studies where we collected evidence across multiple studies, and then we found that you can actually diagnose schizophrenia approximately with like 83% accuracy. Depression is a bit worse, 77%. So that was a little bit the starting point. If you ask very critically from a clinical point of view now, then you have to say, well, do I need an algorithm that can detect schizophrenia with 80% accuracy? Then probably not, because psychiatrists are not bad in detecting schizophrenia. If you have a chronic schizophrenic patient sitting in front of you, you can fairly quickly identify him and say, well, this patient is not a healthy subject. He's suffering from a severe disorder, right? So in the later parts of our research, we focused more on the questions that are more difficult for practicing psychiatrists. And those were mainly two things: is the prediction of the treatment response and the prediction of the outcome. So we have a couple of papers where we show that you can use different types of data. So this could be clinical and demographic data to predict which patient is going to respond to which interventions. It could be a patient with psychosis, so schizophrenia, whether he's going to respond to an antipsychotic medication or not. Or, for instance, we have a paper where we show that you can use clinical data to say if a patient with depression will respond to extracranial brain stimulation, which is a new technique that allows you to stimulate with electrodes the brain with some mild current, and it can also help to treat depression. Then there's the other big field, which is the prediction of outcome. And what we're doing here is that we try to identify patients that do not suffer from schizophrenia, but have some mild symptoms that are qualitatively similar as the symptoms in schizophrenia, like hallucinations. So this could be, for instance, you don't hear voices, but you feel sometimes uncomfortable and you're not sure whether you heard a voice or not, or you hear a voice, but you have maybe some distance to it. You know that it's not real, but still it might be a little bit unsettling. And what we know is that those individuals that have mild symptoms, they have a risk to develop schizophrenia. So what we're trying to do is that we identify those patients before they suffer from schizophrenia, and we use machine learning to say which one of those is going to develop schizophrenia and therefore might be a perfect patient for targeted intervention, and which one of those patients will not develop schizophrenia and does not need any intervention. So that would be sort of an application of data science and machine learning for prevention or targeted intervention. But if you want to know more about our research, then feel free to check our homepage. There's a couple of papers that you can read. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to contact me at any time.
Really recommend it. One of the beautiful things about doing this remote work is that we are introducing speakers that might not necessarily be in the same city as you. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or whatever the speakers are comfortable with more questions and more points afterwards. I would like to take Max Schuster has been waiting for quite a bit, I think, on his question. And he has actually two of them that I'm going to combine into one. So but sorry, Max, another second, is that I also asked to add a link to the comment section regarding a course that Rafael did for data science for healthcare workers. And if you're interested in it, you can send him a message and he will provide an access code for you to take a look, especially meant for healthcare professionals. But then back to Max, we're gonna take a look at the question: do you encounter often limitations to use advanced data science solutions such as ML and AI in your work? And then his second question is a variation of that, but regarding data privacy. So I think that when it comes to this, I think Rafael would be a good place to start. Rafael, do you feel that you face limitations in applying, let's say, deep data science or deep AI into healthcare? So bring it about. And if data is an issue.
There's some very pertinent obstacles and challenges. I mean, I'm in a different position to Joseph because I'm more junior than him. You know, he's a psychiatrist, and I'm still in the middle of my training. So that presents challenges because I have less sort of power when it comes to making decisions or getting data, and I'm going to be like that for a while. And the people that are possibly thinking about learning data science, they're going to be in that position as well. So I think you have to be, so the challenges are, first of all, getting the data, because all the regulations, number one. Number two, sometimes you need support for other surrounding things. For example, cleaning the data, and sometimes there's no one else to help you. It's only you. And to get funding for this type of thing, it can take a very long period of time. It can take up to years. And by the time it gets to the point where they're ready to give you funding, because you filled out all the paperwork, you could have moved on to your next training. So you need to be quite flexible, and you need to be really quite productive, I think, to overcome these challenges, and be quite persistent, somewhat quite passionate as well. You have to really care about it, because everyone else, your colleagues, if you're on a clinical training program, they're focusing on one thing and you're focusing on multiple. So challenges, and also another big thing is that, of course, the complexity and the understandability. I think there's a better word for it. Clinicians that aren't data scientists and aren't really statistically know much about that field, you need to, even if you do have great results, they need to be able to understand it. If they don't understand it, then they won't use it and they won't even listen to it. They'll just, when you're presenting it, they'll be looking out the window because they don't understand it. So I've used simple things. Some people wouldn't even call it data science, but I would. Logistic regression and linear regression, and that can open the doorway for more complex things. You need to guide them along with you and almost educate them at the same time if you really want to make a big difference. But things like neural networks, it's really quite difficult in the NHS anyway.
Very, very good point. Does anybody else want to take the question? Andres?
Yeah, maybe a little bit on the semantic representation of the data of healthcare and how this could influence different methods or different approximations like machine learning, right? So we're going to use a very simple example, hypertension. Like this word hypertension could be intracranial hypertension, like high blood pressure, or different kinds of hypertension. So depending, and this is just a general example, that we have, there's a difference with let's say finance, that our data in healthcare have many semantic representations, and the semantic representation can influence the utility of a of an approximation, like machine learning, to solve a problem. So there are limitations, but if you understand the limitations of the tool and the limitations of the data, there are ways to circumvent it. There are ways to clean the data. There are ways to avoid these biases and so on and so forth. So, but there are limitations to use it. And as for GDPR, which was the second part of the question, I see it particularly now with the latest sort of GDPR regulation that came from Europe in, I don't know, last year, like last months of last year. I don't see it as a, as a forced, like a prison. I see it as an enabler, right? Like now we all have some clear rules of how to use personal data, when to use it, and if we follow the rules, if we understand the framework, I think it will be all good. Sure, before we used to have more access, but it's also to protect the patient's privacy that we have a little bit of restrictions. So, but if we understand it, we can be good to go.
Joseph, I would like to ask you the question, specifically the second question, the privacy one. Do you feel in the research setting that this is an issue, or you think you have it a bit easier because you're part of a larger institution and there's, let's say, no commercial objective on using the data? How do you guys deal with privacy on that one?
Yeah, so it's a super important topic, and I think as medical doctors, we are between the two areas, and I feel that we're responsible to do research and treat patients and try to create a benefit for the patients, but it also means to protect their data and their privacy, and there is a whole range of ethical questions that is connected to that. And I think that it is a big challenge, and I think by realizing where the potential is of data science and AI, we also need to discuss where the boundary needs to be. And this involves a discussion with doctors, but of course the patients, but society in general. So it's not what we doctors can do on our own. I think what is good for the European Union that we have very clear regulations what as far as data privacy is concerned. But of course, it's sometimes not easy to implement this in clinical practice. So this is also true for us as an academic, for the university, as an academic institution. We have to respect those rules. There is lots of documentation that comes with this, and there's lots of hardware implementations that are required to make sure that data is safe and so on. But I think it's important. But I believe it's true. It can represent a challenge for young doctors if you don't have the knowledge and expertise, and you don't have an infrastructure like university where maybe some of those procedures are already established, and you can talk to someone that can assist you a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I think it's important to consider those aspects.
Thank you very much, Joseph. As we're coming to the end of the panel, I just want to make a mention to Max's follow-up on explainable AI, which is a super interesting topic, and it is so interesting that it's coming to Meetup AI in the coming events. So pay attention to the group. It's going to come soon. And we bring to the last question to finalize our panel, which is short, quick advice for doctors in situations like this that want to make the jump. What would you advise them to do? How to get started? And what can they do? Practical steps. So I would recommend Kristana starting first, but then whoever wants to follow up, just raise your hands and I will be bringing through. So Kristana?
Yeah, I would definitely advise to on the practical side, do some online courses, see if you like programming, if you like data science, check out a bit where there might be fields that concretely interest you. And if you want to do that, then go ahead and do a training maybe, or if you have time enough, then you can also learn it on your own, but it will take more time, I guess. But I can definitely recommend a bootcamp so far.
Mm-hmm. So who will go next?
I'll go.
Rafael?
Yeah, I'd say, a tip that is really important, I think, is that programming and data science is something to be enjoyed, and the amount of effort and stress that it takes, sometimes mental and kind of physical stress, because you have to work for a long period. Well, you don't have to work for a long period of time, but sometimes that's what you end up doing. So when you enjoy it, it becomes a lot easier because you're focused on what you can achieve. And, you know, just like a medical degree or any such degree, you know, a minimum for a degree is 3 years, medical degree is 5 years, and PhD is another 3 years. So, you know, programming, don't try and think of it as a, you know, just putting a small bit of time into it and seeing what you can get. You know, it's something that is going to take time, like a language. And the more you practice the language, it can take years to get to the level where you can speak business using that language. And programming is the same thing. That doesn't mean you can't be useful even at an early stage, like going to a country that you can't speak the language. With a basic level of the understanding of the language, you're still going to be useful. So, you know, try and enjoy it, and it's a journey.
Very, very good. Joseph?
Yeah, like my number one tip would be start with a practical example. So I think if you really have a specific research question and that motivates you and that you're passionate about, then things will fall into place. Because I cannot imagine, or it's at least hard to imagine, that there is a medical question that is not applicable for data science methods. And if you start by something that you're passionate about, then yeah, it will become a joyful journey.
Very, very good. And Andres, then to finish up the panel, your final piece of advice.
It's the same as Joseph. I think like during med school, we many times during a day, I don't know, during a semester, we come up with an idea, right? So maybe some professors have some funding for ideas similar to this. Reach out and start working in these ideas. While working, you will realize if you like coding or not, or if you like managing a project, or if you like to apply for grants to get project money into projects, or if you like more the business side of it, and you will find your way, right? But if you don't start, you'll never find your way. So same as Joseph, you see, something that sort of itches you, jump into it.
That's a very good. If it interests you, jump into it. That is the final words of the panel for today, and I could not choose them better. I would like to take the spot here to thank all of our speakers for coming in, having this delicious discussion with us, and hopefully waking up a couple of ideas on our community's mind on taking the jump themselves. If you're doctors, nurses, people in any part of the healthcare system. I thank the audience also for staying with us for this full hour, and then I give it to our very good friends at Machine Learning in Healthcare. Please like and subscribe if you like this video. There's a lot more content. We did a couple partnerships with ML in healthcare already. And take a look at Meetup AI while you're at it. Adam, thank you very much for inviting us. And the stage is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much for joining. I just probably will reiterate what you just said, Nicholas. Thanks a lot for all the panelists for super exciting discussion. I think we already, I learned a lot of really new and novel aspects to this topic, which is really fruitful, I think. Thank you, everyone who has joined us. Follow us, subscribe on YouTube, as already said. Do feel free to join on the Wonder link, which will help us. And see you next time. Very happy to have a good meetup.
Thank you very much. See you on Wonder.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.